And now for the fun part of multiple hooping. What we're going to do is end up with the stitch out of just placement stitches and crosshairs of the complete design. I'm going to walk you through how to do this step by step through the rest of this video. The first thing I want to talk about is to do the preparation work for multiple hoopings. The first thing I did was print out the instructions as you see here, and it's got part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. I then took my thumb drive to my embroidery machine and I called up each part and noted what size stitch area it needed and how that corresponds to my hoops. While the back of the pattern cover shows you the largest stitch area required, some of these parts may end up in smaller hoops, so you want to find out what size it works for your machine. In my case, part 1 is going to be in the largest hoop, part 2 is going to be able to fit in an 8x8, and then part 3 and part 4 will fit in an 8x12 hoop. So once I know the size of the hoops, I go ahead and cut my stabilizer, my sticky tearaway stabilizer, to work with those hoops. After I get that set up, I'm going to go ahead and prepare my background fabric, which will be 20x24. I press it very well with a Mary Ellen Best press. Then I go ahead and fold it in half, increase it, and fold it in half, increase it, and those two crease lines are the start of the alignment for my alignment crosshairs. So each of my parts and each of the designs will line up perfectly using the alignment crosshairs that match it from part 1 to part 2, part 3, and part 4. And we'll show you how that works here in a minute. As I mentioned, when you bring up the design, the needle position is going to be in the center of the design, and on my screen it has a little green crosshair. I want to move the needle position to crosshair A, and the way I would do that is I would press the number 1 here, and then I would go ahead and move my fabric to align there. As you might notice, I've got my tearaway sticky stabilizer on the hoop. I've got my background fabric loose laying on top, and what I'm going to do without any thread in the needle is move my background fabric until I have the intersection of those two creases right below the needle down position. So I've also marked this slightly with a water soluble because on the white fabric it was hard for me to see exactly where that intersection is. So I think I've got it right in the center there. Bring my needle down, and I do have it dead center at the intersection of those two creases and on the drawn crosshair lines that I put in there. So this is crosshair A. I'm pressing around it, bring my needle position up. Now I'm going to go to color change number 2 on my screen, and I'm going to move my needle position to the center of that. You can see my hoop is moving. So now color change 2 is crosshair B, and I want to make sure it's going to line up in the center of that vertical crease. So I put my needle down. I'm off a little bit, so I'm going to move my background fabric just slightly. Needle down again, and just slightly back this way. There, I'm dead center. I'm going to press it around again with my finger. So I've secured or anchored A and B so far. I'm going to go to color change number 3. Again, do +1 to make sure that my needle position is in the center of crosshair C. And per my instructions, that means I'm going to do the needle down in the horizontal crease, and it's dead center. Yay! And I bring it back up. At this point, I have 3 anchor points at A, B, and C. I'm going to take my hoop with my background fabric off the embroidery unit, keep everything intact. I'm going to put it on a flat surface, and I'm going to take my hand and press down on the background fabric to make sure the whole background fabric is secured to the sticky stabilizer. And when I come back, I'm going to recheck those alignments. I've returned my hoop to the embroidery unit, and I've left off over here at color change number 3. Well, the number 3 is crosshair C, so I really need to go back up to number 1 because that's crosshair A, and I'm going to press down the center of it. And then I'm coming back over to my machine here of the hoop and make sure that if I do a needle down, it's still right dead center in that intersection of those two creases. And they look like they are. Now I'm going to go to color number 2, which is B, and I'm just going to double check that that lines up, and it does. And then I go back to color number 3, and I'm going to do my needle down, and if that's in a horizontal line, perfect. If any one of these 3 were not lined up perfectly, you would need to start the process over by simply lifting up your background fabric from the sticky and start again with the alignment process. So going back to the detail instructions, we've already did crosshair color changes 1 through 3, which is crosshair A, B, and C. And the next couple of steps are for the fleece that would fleece or embroidery batting that you would use for the trapunto stitches. So that's 4 and 5. But if you notice in the column that says applique shapes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, each one of those have a placement stitch. So at this point, I've gone ahead and put thread into my thread and threaded the needle, and I'm going to skip through to position 6, 11, 16, 21, and 26 to stitch out all the placement stitches for those 5 applique shapes. And then I'll go to the very end, which is color change number 31, and stitch out crosshairs at the very end that will be used for future parts. On my screen, I'm going to move in my down arrow until I get to placement stitch color change number 6, which I have on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and initiate my machine to do that placement stitch. And this will be for applique shape number 1. I went ahead and moved to color number 11, which is the placement stitch for applique shape number 2. I'm going to stitch out the placement stitches for that. Then I'll move to number 16, 21, and 26 to make sure I have the placement stitches for all 5 applique shapes for this section.
Go.
We have now at the very last color change, which is color change number 31 for part 1, and it is going to stitch out the crosshairs. It will stitch out crosshair A, B, and C, and there's also additional crosshairs for other sections that it will stitch out. These will be used as appropriate per the instructions. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and stitch out all these crosshairs. Have removed the bulk of the sticky tearaway stabilizer from the back of part 1. I have kept the sticky stabilizer wherever there's a stitched out crosshair. I don't want to pull that out. I want to have that be secure because I'm going to need those to align up with future parts. Again, just remove the bulk of it. When you do the actual design with the applique, you're going to end up having some of the sticky stabilizer in the applique shapes, and you'll remove that later once the whole thing is completed. I have just loaded part 2 of the wall hanging for September. This is the bird, and per the instructions I'm going to line up on D, E, and H crosshairs. Again, the picture of the bird is on the instructions. It shows you where D and E is, which are the stitched out crosshairs from part 1, and H is going to be on the crease because it's way up here. We haven't gotten up there yet. So we'll have 2 on crosshairs, stitched out crosshairs, and 1 that's on a vertical crease. In the overall picture, you can see that we've got the placement stitches for part 1, and D and E and H are marked on the diagram here as well. So we're going to go ahead and do that alignment now. As I mentioned, the design has come up and the needle position is in the center of the design. I'm going to click on the number one, +1 here to move the needle position on the center of crosshair D. And on my background fabric, it is this one here, which is marked on my instructions. So you can line those up very well, know exactly which crosshair you need to line up on. In this case, it's stitched out. I'm going to need to adjust this slightly. Bring my needle down in the center of D. That looks good right there. I'm going to press around and bring it back up, my needle position. Go to color change number 2, which is E. I'm going to go to that other crosshair that we stitched out as part of the part 1. And again, I'm just going to move my fabric and look at that, right dead center. Yay! This gets easier the more you do it. Come back up, go to position number 3, which is H. Now remember, there's no crosshair that's stitched out. It'll have to be on that vertical crease. So depending on where the design falls in the layout, you're either going to be doing it on creases or on stitched out crosshairs from part 2 onward. And that looks good right there. I'm going to bring that back up. I'm going to do the same step that I did before. We're going to remove the hoop from the embroidery unit. I'm going to put it on a flat surface. Hand press that background fabric down, come back, go up to check the alignments of D, E, and H based on going back to position number color change 1, 2, and 3. And once I have all that done, I'll stitch out the placement stitches with a different color thread. So I have confirmed my alignment of crosshairs D, E, and H for color changes 1 through 3. Per my instructions, I have applique shape 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 that I'm going to do the placement stitches, and that will be color change number 6, 11, 21, and 26. And in this case, there are no additional crosshairs that need to be stitched out for this part. So we're just doing the placement stitches for those different sections, and I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. As you can see, I've completed all the placement stitches for part 2 of the September block of the month design. I decided to use a different color thread so I could tell the difference between part 1 and part 2. It's just your own preference. Again, at the end of the day, the only reason why we're doing this procedure is for you to get familiar with the multiple hooping technique. This becomes something that you can throw away or hang on your wall saying, oh, I know how to do multiple hoopings. But it's not meant to be kept for anything in the long term. So now we're looking at part 3, and the reason I want to bring this one up is it follows the same process it did for part 1 and part 2. It tells you exactly what crosshairs we're going to line on, D, G, and K. In this case, D and G are stitched out, and K is going to be on that vertical crease. But what I wanted you to note here in this case, the block actually has to rotate 90 degrees in order for this to fit into the hoop. So that's a unique thing on this particular one. Not all of them have that, but I wanted you to feel comfortable that it's okay to rotate your background fabric and get it in the proper position for when it needs to be fitting in the hoop in a different orientation. At this point, while the background fabric is rotated 90 degrees, the process is still the same. I've just put the needle position in the center of stitched out crosshair D. I'm going to bring that up. I'm going to go to color change number 2 and go to the center of that, which this is G. And again, I'm going to bring my needle down, bring it back up, just adjust slightly, and bring it back down. That's in the center. And then I'm going to bring the needle back up, go to color change number 3, and again this is on the crease, vertical crease. And while you're looking at horizontally, it's still the vertical crease because the background fabric has been turned 90 degrees. At this point, I would do the same process that I did with part 1 and part 2. I'll go ahead and take the hoop to the flat table, press it all down, come back, double check my alignment, and go ahead and do the placement stitches for all the parts for number 3, following the instructions and seeing wherever the placement stitches are. So this is going to be your final product. As you can see, the flower part was done in a different color thread, and then I did a different color thread for part 3 or part 4. So at this point you can see all the different parts that we've done. You can see the alignment crosshairs. There are going to be times that you want to clip that after you do the alignment, but at this point you have a finished outline product, which is a test stitch out. You can throw it away or you could frame it. You can do whatever you want with it. It's just for you to learn how to do the multiple hooping. And now you have it conquered. Yay!